Hello, I'm Alex Colvin. I'm the Dean of Cornell University's Industrial and Labor Relations School. On behalf of the ILR School, I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar on job creation for a just society. As the nation's leading educational institution focused on work, employment, and labor, it's our pleasure to be hosting today's webinar as part of the Equity in Focus series that examines how best to advance equity in job creation. We're very pleased to be partnering with the Women's Bureau of the U.S. Department of Labor on this webinar series. I also want to extend my thanks to my colleagues at ILR's Work Institute for organizing today's webinar, particularly Anne-Marie Brady, who will be facilitating today. And special thanks go to our tech experts, Alison Dunchick, Don Baisley, and D.H. Goodall for making this all happen. Envisioning how we can advance job creation in a way that enhances equity is a central challenge of our time. To do so, we need to bring together research and practice. We also need to have a broad and inclusive range of voices in the conversation. And I'm really pleased to see the great lineup of participants we have for you today. Our webinar today focuses on issues of equity and job creation in the construction industry. This is a centrally important industry for our economy, and one that has historically created many good and well-paying jobs. But it's also one that has struggled with issues of equity. I think back to my own first research assistant job, tracking the inclusion of women in various jobs, and construction jobs were consistently at the bottom end of representation of women across all jobs in the economy. As a faculty member, when I teach labor employment law, I'm also struck by the number of key cases on discrimination by both race and gender that come out of this industry. There are clearly many things that we need to address to ensure equity at work in this industry. Equity at work has been a major focus of our research, teaching, and outreach work at ILR. Our Work Institute has made equity a central priority in its work, seeking to identify and promote productive approaches to issues of equity and diversity, treating them as fundamental to worker rights and essential to collective representation. We're looking forward to engaging and productive conversations on all of these issues in today's webinar. Now, to kick things off, it's my great pleasure to turn to the U.S. Deputy Secretary of Labor, Julie Su, who's going to give some remarks to introduce things.
Hello, everyone. I'm U.S. Deputy Secretary of Labor, Julie Su. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the first Equity in Focus webinar, co-hosted by the U.S. Department of Labor Women's Bureau and the Worker Institute at Cornell University. I want to thank the Worker Institute at Cornell for your partnership in co-hosting today's event. It's also wonderful to be here with New York State Labor Commissioner Roberta Reardon and all of the organizations and speakers who will share your expertise and insights today. I am very lucky to be working with my wonderful colleagues at the Department of Labor, including Wendy Chun Hoon, Director of our Women's Bureau, and Senior Advisor Gail Golden, and Caitlin Walker Mooney, the Director of our Good Jobs Initiative. I'm proud to be serving alongside these outstanding women who are putting equity first in everything we do. It is no accident that President Biden's Day One executive order was on advancing racial equity and support for underserved communities. At the Department of Labor, we think every day about how to deliver on that commitment. Key to advancing racial equity is good jobs. Too many jobs done by people of color and women of color are low-wage jobs without security and basic protections. So, for the Department of Labor, enforcement to end wage theft and to ensure safe and healthy workplaces is a top priority. Throughout the pandemic, workers lost jobs and whole industries shut down almost overnight, but unemployment was not born equally. Communities of color, particularly African Americans and Native Americans, experienced even more devastating rates of unemployment, and even today, their unemployment rates remain higher. The Biden-Harris administration made early policy decisions to address the need for a safety net for the unemployed, and we have made good middle-class jobs and access to those jobs so no one is left behind the heart of our economic agenda. These policies have produced a historic economic recovery, with a record 6.6 million jobs added in the president's first year in office. At the Department of Labor, we are focused on empowering all workers, morning, noon, and night. This means we are prioritizing policies to address the care needs of families and the quality of care jobs. It means protecting health care and retirement benefits and strengthening the unemployment insurance system. These are not just words. They mean the difference between a worker being able to go to a job or staying home to care for a child. The difference between food on the table or hunger. The difference between putting your head on the pillow at the end of the day, feeling secure, or staying up all night worried about how to pay the rent or get to the grocery store or whether you'll get to go to college. The president's bipartisan infrastructure law is investing $1 trillion in communities across America, creating millions of good-paying union jobs. These jobs will transform rail, roads, bridges, and public transit, and modernize our ports and airports. Manufacture solar panels, wind farms, batteries, and electric vehicles to grow clean energy supply chains, and bring clean drinking water and high-speed internet to every home and school in America. But under the status quo, most of these new jobs won't go to women. Right now, 95% of construction laborers and nearly 98% of electricians are men. And it's Black History Month, and history teaches us that Black workers have often been shut out of these opportunities in the past. So we have to be strategic, intentional, and act with urgency. The responsibility is on all of us to create pathways and opportunities for those too long excluded from economic security, even in times of prosperity. By addressing equity for women and for people of color, it also opens up the opportunity to address equity for all communities, including people with disabilities, people who are formerly incarcerated, people in rural communities, and making sure that all have access to good jobs. That's what we're focused on in the Department of Labor's workforce investments, and that's what we're focused on in our Good Jobs initiative. And that's why the conversation happening today is so important. The fact is that women's work has always been devalued. We've built our economy on the unpaid and underpaid labor of women caring for our children and our elders. Jobs that are typically held by men, like the trades, are paid better than childcare or elder care. Yet both careers are necessary for us to function. This fails to tap into the full, amazing strengths and talents of women. It's not good for families, and it's not sustainable for our economy. So we need to expand opportunities into more good jobs for women, and we need to raise wages for care workers and all the essential workers we depend on. And to do that, we need all hands on deck. So we call on you, our valued partners, to prioritize 3 things as we think about the future of our economy. First, job quality. Use your power and your voice to raise the floor, to demand that jobs have living wages, health insurance, benefits, and dignity and respect for workers. This includes making sure that subcontractors, not just the primary contractors, abide by good job standards. Second, equity. As we recover as a country, the president has been crystal clear that equity and the fight against systemic racism are top priorities. All of us have an absolutely critical role to play in making sure that we are building an economy for all. And this can happen concretely through mechanisms like project labor agreements, community benefits agreements, proactive outreach and recruitment to underserved and underrepresented communities, pre-apprenticeship and registered apprenticeship programs, and concrete language in contracts and agreements that emphasize and enforce anti-discrimination, equal opportunity, and diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. And third, unions. Uphold and protect the right of workers to organize and form and join unions. This is essential to ensure that workers have a real and meaningful voice on the job, resulting in a more engaged workforce and stronger workplaces and stronger communities. Wendy, Chun, Hoon, and AFL-CIO President Liz Schuler released a fantastic article on February 15th about Equal Pay Day, which, as you all know, is the additional days that women have to work into the next year to earn the same as men earned in the last year. And this article notes that union women reach parity with men faster than non-union women. This both shows that we have more work to do to achieve true parity, and that some of the solutions are clear. We just have to be committed to making them real. The Department of Labor is committed to working side by side with all of you to seize the once-in-a-generation opportunity we have to reimagine our economy. Let's get to work.
Thank you, Dean Colvin and Assistant Secretary Sue, for your opening remarks. My name is Anne Marie Brady, and I'm the Research Director for Worker Rights and Equity at the Worker Institute. And I would so like to welcome you to our first in a series of webinars that explores the intersection of equity and inclusion in job creation and economic development, with a spotlight on the construction industry. In order to build an economy that is fair and inclusive, we must address deep and long-standing inequities that continue to hold back women and people of color in the construction industry. The question is, how do we do this? To answer this question and more, I'm so pleased to have join us today 6 leaders in the field to discuss the opportunities and the challenges with infusing equity in job creation. In our first segment, Andrea Flynn, the Senior Director at Insight Center, will provide an overview of the effect inequities in the labor market have had in creating disparate outcomes for women and people of color. To bridge the theory and the research with the practice, I welcome Rahi Reddy, the Director of Metro's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Program, and Kelly Kupchak, Executive Director of Oregon Trade Women, who will present on how they have successfully positioned equity at the center of job creation initiatives in the building trades in Oregon. In our second segment, labor leader Leah Rambo will discuss how to tackle equity in the building trade with New York State Department of Labor Commissioner Rhoda Reardon and policy advisor in the Office of the Secretary for the U.S. Department of Labor, Caitlin Walker Mooney, who will discuss the critical role state and federal leaders play in driving equity and job creation in the construction industry forward. We will then bring all the participants together to answer questions from the audience. And I would ask that you would please add your questions to the comment section. We will field those questions and then ask accordingly. Finally, this webinar will close with reflections from the Director of the Women's Bureau, Wendy Chun Hoon. So let's get this started. Let's turn now to Andrea, who will start us off.
Thank you so much, Anne-Marie. It's such a pleasure to be here with you and all of these esteemed speakers today, who I'm really looking forward to hearing from and learning from this morning or this afternoon. I was asked to share a few words today to help frame our conversation about equity and job creation in the construction industry. The conversation that we're going to have today about getting women, and particularly women of color, into more secure, higher paying jobs that present greater opportunities is so, so important, particularly in this moment in time. And it's also only part of a much larger conversation that's taking place right now about fundamental shifts that we need to make in our economy to correct for the deep inequities that have existed since the very beginning of our history, inequities that have been exacerbated by the pandemic, and that we're able to ensure an equitable economy for all moving forward. At the outset, I want to say, I think it's really critical that we center Black women in these conversations. While our economy has long relied on their unpaid and underpaid labor, they have long been excluded from our labor market and continue to face some of the worst labor market outcomes, along with unfavorable social and economic outcomes across many categories of any demographic group in the country. They've long been excluded by our policies, our programs, and our practices, and we now have a century of evidence to show that race and gender-blind policies will only replicate longstanding disparities and inequities. There are 3 main points that I'd like to focus on today to get us started. First, I think it's critical that we acknowledge the challenges women face in the labor market are not personal failings. They're structural failures that cannot be addressed without structural responses. Second, getting women into jobs from which they've historically been excluded is a critical step. And we also need to change the very conditions of work, broadly speaking. Thrive in those jobs, conditions that allow them to bring their whole selves to those jobs, not only requires serious policy change, but also culture change. Let me start with the structural pieces. Occupational segregation in our labor market along both race and gender lines has long been a feature of the U.S. economy. These dynamics have often been blamed on individual deficits. Common narratives tell us that some folks simply don't have enough education or enough experience or the right credentials, or maybe they're not trying hard enough. They're not pulling themselves up by their bootstraps. But these are false narratives meant to distract us from the root causes of labor market inequities and the role that our history of racial and gender exclusion and inequity still has on present-day opportunities and outcomes. The occupational segregation that we see today is an outgrowth of the slavery and Jim Crow eras. The racial apartheid system of these periods, the explicitly racially exclusive rules they gave birth to, have had a long and pernicious legacy on our labor market. Jobs were so racially segregated during the New Deal era that the New Deal ensured the exclusion of Black workers by simply carving out exceptions for domestic and agricultural workers. In 1930, the legacy of slavery had perpetuated unemployment channels to such an extent that 41% of Black men were employed in agriculture compared to 26% of white men, and 63% of Black women worked as domestic workers compared to 20% of white women. While the new rules of the New Deal era vastly expanded labor protections for white workers and ultimately paved a pathway to the middle class for many of them, they've replicated the exclusions of earlier decades and solidified deep social and economic inequities along the lines of race and gender. These trends, of course, not only had a major impact on labor market opportunities, but also on a broad range of issues like health access, home ownership, education, etc. New Deal era policies, which were often thought of as a beacon of progressive policymaking, also deeply entrenched racial wealth inequities. I think it's really critical that we consider the role of wealth and the historical nature of racial and gender wealth gaps when we talk about the labor market. When we think of the causal relationships between income and wealth, we most often think of income as a wealth generator or lack of income as a barrier to building wealth. However, we should also think about that relationship in reverse. Wealth enables people to take chances, to advance their education, to start small businesses, to have a cushion to leave unsafe and unhealthy jobs. And the dramatic differences in wealth between Black and white Americans today across all income and education levels impacts Black Americans' labor market mobility. This is just one of the many ways that our long history of racial and gender exclusions shapes how Black Americans are able to access high-quality jobs. Now to the changing the conditions of work that I mentioned earlier. As we focus on addressing the structural barriers to better employment opportunities for women, we also need to think about what is required to change the very nature of work. The pandemic has illustrated the extreme cost of having an economy that disregards women and families. Our lack of paid sick and family leave and affordable childcare have pushed millions of women out of the labor market, with many yet to return. And we know that Black and brown women have been disproportionately impacted by these trends, as we just heard a few minutes ago. In fact, at the end of December, the unemployment rate for Black women was still double that of white women. The pandemic also showed us the powerful and very necessary role of public investments. Pandemic relief packages kept many women and families afloat. I saw this in my own family. My mother has been a full-time waitress for her entire life, and her very first day of paid leave in her entire career was during the pandemic, thanks to early relief packages. Particularly in this environment, an environment with unchecked growth in corporate power and ongoing threats to worker power, public goods, and a broader conception of what is considered a public good is really needed to ensure that workers can thrive in their jobs. In addition, I also hope we can think about how the threats to women's health and safety in many workplaces impacts their ability to stay and move up in their jobs. When we think about the broad range of work-family policies that are needed to create a more equitable labor market, we also need to think about how we can ensure that our policies squarely address the harassment and violence that women face in their places of work. These are dynamics that have a significant impact on pay equity and also labor market participation. Lastly, I just want to say a few words about culture change. Policy change is obviously critically important, both inside workplaces and also at the local, state, and federal level. But policy change alone will not be enough. Today, our policies and practices have reinforced racial and gender equities because they have been shaped by sexism and racism. We need to look at the root cause of the issues we're talking about today. Our policies today reflect a culture that for hundreds of years has devalued and degraded women's labor, and particularly the labor of Black and Brown women. The pandemic and the policy conversations and failures that have emerged from it remind us over and over again, we live in a dominant culture that simply does not value women. Just yesterday, many of us saw a report that the maternal mortality rate has increased since the start of the pandemic, and that 1/3 of the mothers who have died were Black, even though Black women only represent 13% of the population. These trends are not separate from the conversation we are having today about the labor market. Women's health, wealth, and well-being are inextricably linked and reflect our society's commitment or lack thereof to equity. Our notions of deservedness, our ideas about who deserves good jobs, who deserves public investments, who deserves for their families to be cared for, who deserves to be guaranteed a floor of well-being. These are ideas that are deeply steeped in racism and sexism and a toxic mix of both. Those ideas have created punitive social and economic policies, from the New Deal to welfare reform, that have hindered the ability of Black women in particular to access quality jobs and achieve economic security for themselves and their families. We must interrogate the narratives that perpetuate these ideas, the policies they undergird, and the deep inequities they drive, and create new narratives that make it possible for us to create a different story for women in this country. I believe we cannot do that without centering the experiences, voices, and expertise of Black women. We have hundreds of years of history to show us that justice and opportunity and equity will not trickle down. But I do believe if we center those who have been most excluded in impact and enable them to thrive, it will benefit us all. Thank you so much. I'm really looking forward to hearing from the rest of our speakers this morning.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Andrea. Raha and Kelly, your work has been cited as some of the most innovative work in advancing equity in the construction industry. Rahi, let's start with you to learn more about the Oregon model.
Thank you so much, Cornell ILR and the Women's Bureau, for having us. We're really excited to be here. We're really here to share the model that we've developed in the Portland Metro region called the Construction Careers Pathways Framework, which delivers racial equity outcomes on our infrastructure projects. Our work has brought together unlikely partners in the Portland region and across public jurisdictions and stakeholders in the construction industry. And it's centered on ensuring that workers of color and women are able to not only access quality jobs in the construction sector, but able to make them into lifelong careers. And this effort also ensures that we in the public sector, who are building a lot of stuff, are able to have the workforce we need to build our region. Metro is the only regional government in the country. So I just have to always say a little bit about Metro. We don't run buses or trains. We're actually a regional government in the Portland metro area. We are the metropolitan planning organization for the region. We also manage the region's waste and recycling system and 17,000 acres of parks and natural spaces, in addition to our visitor venues. So we have a variety of mix of work that we do. We can go to the next slide. It was really great to follow Andrea and the amazing work of rewriting the racial rules, because we use this systems thinking to understand the racial and gender rules that undergird the construction sector. Our elected council at Metro in 2016 adopted a strategic plan to advance racial equity, diversity, and inclusion as kind of our guiding policy on advancing equity in the region. And in that plan, specifically, community leaders, especially Black community leaders, called on Metro to use its convening role as a regional government to bring together partners in the region to advance quality careers for workers of color in the construction sector. They saw all of the development that was happening all around and wondering, what access do workers of color have to those jobs? And you can imagine, just looking at this slide, you can imagine the legacy that they're talking about. There has been a legacy that was the exact opposite of governments defining the racial rules to continue to disempower Black workers from accessing the benefits of their skills on so many different levels and so many efforts. So we're really grateful to our Metro Council that pushed us to play that role in our region. Next slide. And as Andrea mentioned, I won't say any more here, but the legacy of that disempowerment, the legacy of those racial rules continue to be seen today and continue to be seen and experienced, especially by Black workers and Black women in our region as well. Next slide, please. So what we face now in our construction sector is skilled trades workers are in high demand. You all know this. It's happening in all your regions. And yet, the existing pool of skilled trades workers is also shrinking. For every 5 construction workers nearing retirement, only 3 new workers under the age of 24 are entering the workforce. So we need 14,000 construction workers alone just in our region to complete the 80 plus capital projects that we have greenlighted already. Next slide, please. And for new entrants into the industry, the picture is worrisome. Overall completion rate for an apprentice in the construction sector in Oregon is 46%. That means 1 out of 2 that go into an apprenticeship are not completing their training. While the completion rate is even worse for female apprentices at 38% and 35% for minority apprentices. And for us as a government, when we think about this as well, is where are these investment losses in our workforce? For every apprentice who drops out of their program in the first year of apprenticeship, we lose about $10,000 worth of workforce investments. Next slide. In 2017, Metro and the City of Portland partnered up to fund a market study. First, to understand what is the demand we're making on the labor market with all of our projects. And then to understand what are workers experiencing on the ground in the process of becoming a skilled trades worker. As you can see in this slide, and my partner in the work, Kelly Kupchak, later will explain as well, that there are many steps that a worker has to go through to get the skills and training to achieve a certificate of completion. And what we learned is that in this process of about 4 to 5 years of training, that workers of color and women face many economic and caregiving challenges to pursuing this career at all. And that systemic racism and sexism are so deep and pervasive in this industry and interwoven. Everything from who you know to even be aware of the opportunities of this industry to experiencing unwelcoming culture on the job site with bullying and harassment, and to not having workplace mentors that understand you and are invested in your success. Next. As public owners of the construction projects that we had before us, we knew we had to play a significant role to set new rules that leaned us toward racial equity and gender equity. In 2017, Metro began having these conversations with our local governments to see how can we address some of these key issues in the industry and harness the opportunity of over $4 billion worth of construction that were going to happen. And our union partners, contractor community, and workforce partners also felt and told us many times, we have to shift course soon, that we can't keep doing the same things over and over and expect different results. And we are so grateful to those partners who banged their head against the wall, like Kelly and others, to keep us aware of what was happening to workers on the ground. So collectively, we know what the outcomes were. We wanted to increase these career opportunities. We wanted to help meet the regional demand. But we had to also utilize regional coordination to leverage bigger impact. We had to create some consistent policies around recruitment, training, and retention. And we had this big hope that we would make impact and create high road industry standards and make them the norm in the construction industry. Next. So what we learned through the work that we did together was that we had to have a shared framework of how public agencies would align all of those outcomes to get to real impact. And we really distilled this framework down to 4 key strategies. That is what encompasses the construction careers framework. The first is creating demand for diverse workers by setting uniform goals across our agencies and establishing project thresholds where goals kick in. So we really wanted to send market signals to our contractors that whether you work for X county or metro or this city, that we are having the same goals of what we expect to see on our work sites. That's the percentage of hours that are given to apprentices, the percentage of work hours for apprentice and journey for women and for people of color, and that this sends clear market signals. The second key piece is we have to invest in the workforce. We have heard from many of our leaders today that we need to ensure that our workers have what they need to be successful in these careers. So that's not only in investing in the direct support that we have done, but also to build the capacity of our workforce partners like Oregon Tradeswomen and Constructing Hope and others so they could grow their programs to scale. And to invest on our work sites to implement mandatory on-site anti-harassment and respectful workplaces training on all of our projects. That if we set those standards and help fund and make sure that that's happening, that is going to build new workplace culture. The third piece of our framework is we have to be accountable to each other and track and report. What are we doing on our projects? How are our contractors doing? And what can we share with each other as agencies and our community? And a big piece of that is to ensure we have partnerships with our union partners, to be side by side with them in embedding standards in our project labor agreements and workforce agreements, so that we all have a shared plan on how we're going to deliver on equity and make sure that these are great jobs. And the last piece is really the ongoing regional collaboration. We can't do this if we don't continue to work together and share strategies and best practices and sit together to address the problems we see in the industry. Next. So our timeline, though it took several years and we faced the pandemic in the middle of it, really relied on first building a solid foundation of relationship building, to really look at all the stakeholders in this arena that are going to really have a stake in the game. We established this study and this market study, as I mentioned, as a kind of making the case for the why. Why do we have to do this and why do we have to do things differently? We created a public owner work group of 16 agencies across the region to talk about what we can do better and how we can push ourselves beyond even our best examples of work. And we met for a year to come up with kind of the key elements of the framework. And we are now currently in phase 4, where agencies are formally adopting the framework and committing to the strategies. To date, we have 8 jurisdictions that have adopted. That's cities, counties, schools, community colleges. And we continue to work with our labor partners and our workforce partners along this whole process of implementation. Next. And so we faced some significant challenges, as you can imagine, with the pandemic, but we kept the work going because it was so vital. And already we have some kind of key accomplishments we're excited about. Number one is we actually have helped develop and launch a respectful workplace curriculum and training that will be deployed on all of our projects. We even have sample procurement language that all the agencies can cut and paste in the contracts to ensure that this training happens. We have in the kind of almost in finalizing a multi-jurisdictional workforce agreement with our union partners that embeds racial equity outcomes in the processes of our union partners of how they deploy workers on site and what are the roles and responsibilities for contractors. We also are working on strategically collaborating around workforce funding, so we can all really pool our money in strategic ways to pivot and grow the workforce in the ways that the labor market needs. Next. And this is just really an example of high-level picture of our regional collaboration and what we've been able to do. But I want to show you the next slide. When we talk about the who, we can talk in big top lines, but I love to see the names. We have such a diverse set of stakeholders that meet every quarter to work on implementation of the kinds of things that we've talked about. And we're excited because it takes a lot to get these leaders together and to have the kind of wherewithal to continue to work together, see each other, and address the tensions that come up on our projects. Next. So this is my part to say you can do this in your state and region. We know that there are some key components of how every state and region can do a construction careers framework. When you build a solid foundation, identify good strategies. We learned so much from our partners at the City of Seattle, in Boston, in LA, who taught us a lot about their models and incorporated into our own. We formalized commitments. So we had skin in the game of agencies to do what they say they were going to do. And we embedded collaboration as a strategy. And for those of you in the webinar who are in other sectors, so for our partners in philanthropy, a great role you can play is to help fund our community partners to be able to sit at these tables and to work through these agreements. I know in government, we take a while to do stuff, and having the resources of these partners to be able to stick it out with us as we work through these processes is really fantastic. And to be able to fund local workforce studies with real workers at the center of that experience is such an incredible, powerful tool, and love to have you support that. And then for our federal agency partners out there, taking the elements of these frameworks and embedding them into your guidance, into your expectations and models are really just powerful market signals for us in the regions. It really makes sure that we at our state and local regions can meet those demands and see that as the pathway to go. So next slide. We're always happy to help share all our best practices, lessons learned, sample procurement language with any of you out there. And just thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Rahi. Let's turn it over to Kelly.
All right, I'm so grateful to be here today with all of you. I'm Kelly Kupchak, Executive Director at Oregon Tradeswomen. Next slide, please. Just a brief overview of Oregon Tradeswomen. We're a nonprofit that is headquartered in Portland, Oregon, and we do a number of things in our community of practice in the construction sector, including providing support services, wraparound services, and pre-apprenticeship training and culture change. Next slide, please. We do this work because, number one, as other folks have already mentioned on this webinar, there's a huge labor demand to fill for the skilled labor shortage in the construction sector. And at Oregon Tradeswomen, we absolutely see this as a pathway out of poverty for women and their families. And last but certainly not least, it absolutely has an economic impact in the reinvestment in our region and statewide. Certainly when we look at who we serve and how we serve folks and put women to work. For us, the return on investment to the individual, their family, and our community is clear. Last year, our starting wage in first jobs after completing our 192-hour pre-apprenticeship training program was $22.81 an hour. And that is significantly higher than our minimum wage of $12.75 here in Oregon. Next. This matters to us because despite the work that we're doing to shift what the construction trades workforce looks like, women still only represent 4% of the skilled trades workers working with their tools nationally. Here in Oregon, we're a bit higher than that at 8%, so we know we have more work to do. Here in Oregon, 1 of 4 households have an adequate income. And for Black households, that is higher. It's 49%, and Latinx communities is 41%. When we look at the data for women, it is even more stark. Households headed by women have a greater risk of income insufficiency and a greater risk of not meeting their basic needs. That's critical. For the work we do at Oregon Tradeswomen and through our work with the regional collaborative that Rahi talked about through Metro here in the Portland region, we know that putting women to work and women of color to work is critical. So that is, for us, it's unacceptable that these statistics continue, and we're working collaboratively through sound public policy and this collaborative framework to change those outcomes. Next slide, please. So why pre-apprenticeship? Pre-apprenticeship provides employment readiness skills, industry-specific skills, and it helps job seekers see a clear pathway to high-wage, high-skilled jobs with good benefits. And through our work in this collaborative and our work at Oregon Tradeswomen and other pre-apprenticeship training programs in our community of practice, we provide key wraparound services. And we heard that from Deputy Secretary of Labor Sue this morning about how important it is to ensure that we have a culture of care and an economy of care as we look at infrastructure investments. Next slide, please. So in this model, we serve a significant number of single parents, folks who need services because they're returning from incarceration, low-income folks, and certainly at Oregon Tradeswomen, job seekers who identify as women. And this, in our region, is very important, and across the country in your communities, that we are lifting up opportunities for Black, Indigenous, and other people of color. Next slide. We absolutely think about this as a pathway to success. Through all of our efforts as pre-apprenticeship providers in our community of practice, we take very seriously how we do the outreach and recruitment into the career pathways for construction. Next slide, please. As Rahi mentioned, it's really critical to have collaboration across your region, and that includes your provider community. In the Portland region, through the C2P2 model that Metro has led, our pre-apprenticeship training programs do not see each other as competition, but instead work closely together. And through our shared framework and our shared resources, we've been able to significantly increase the completion rate of our program participants, the placement rate into industry, and the retention rate once they get there. Next. Centered to this, all of our work is centered in equity, and we understand how critical it is to have those care supports so that job seekers who are moving out of poverty into prosperity are successful. And our regional framework allows community organizations and culturally specific organizations to collaboratively address these barriers, and that includes transportation, childcare, ensuring folks have tools and equipment, driver's license recovery, and other supports to make sure that their families are successful. Next slide, please. Part of the work that we do is ensuring that once someone graduates from our pre-apprenticeship training program, they are moving into a secure next step in their pathway to success in the construction sector. And that means moving from pre-apprenticeship to registered apprenticeship. At Oregon Tradeswomen, we've worked very hard, and over the last 4 years, we've shifted 30% of our graduates going into union programs to 78%. And we will continue to work on that because, as we know, and Deputy Labor Secretary Sue mentioned this at the top of the hour, when women are on a union path and in a union, they are making better benefits and higher wages, and that leads to economic self-sufficiency. Next slide, please. You can see from this graph that in the Western region, we are working really hard, and we have some fun competition with our state to the north, Washington. Here in Oregon, we are just under 8%, but we know that that is not a high enough number when we look at the construction industry overall. 50% of women make up our workforce, so we know that we have more work to do. But through such efforts as our C2P2 regional framework here in Portland, we are coordinating and collaborating industry efforts and strong, solid public policy outcomes to help us drive the work centered in equity. Next slide, please. We know from research that women, and particularly women of color, continue to face discrimination in hiring and long-term employment. And we also know that we continue to experience high rates of gender bias and harassment on the job. This impacts people's livelihood, it impacts their wellness, it impacts the health and safety of the job site. So Oregon Tradeswomen, is part of the National Task Force on Tradeswomen Issues, where we are working from a public policy framework, similar to what we're doing here with the Metro C2P2 public policy framework, to ensure that there are quality standards and quality measures that relate to equity and job site culture, to ensure that women are not just successful in getting in, but in staying in. Next slide, please. Through the Construction Careers Pathways outcomes, you can see that in addition to the key points that Rahi shared and our accomplishments, that Oregon tradeswomen also help support and launch a Tradesworker Equity Council. And that council works with our Safe from Hate Alliance, where we are focused on job site policy and making sure that job sites are safe for all workers. Next slide, please. That regional collaboration is truly a framework for us to work as an industry, stakeholders and community stakeholders that are committed to equity, but also making sure that quality jobs with good standards are focused and centered in equity and supports all of our workers to a high road career pathway. And our work at Oregon Tradeswomen is centered in equity. Next slide, please. And just as a reminder, when you look at these components of the collaborative model, as Rahi said so eloquently, you can do it. We've done it. We rolled up our sleeves. It's hard work, but if you dig in and work collaboratively, you will see those outcomes. And I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kelly. That was wonderful. As we transition to our second section of the webinar, I just want to remind the audience that we'll be taking questions after this section, so please put your questions in the comment section. Let's turn now to Leah, Roberta, and Caitlin. Leah, reflecting on what has just been discussed, particularly the, on the one hand, what we've known for so long, what we support is the fact that unions play a critical role in establishing quality work and wages. But yet, on the other hand, what Rahi had just talked about, and the fact that there are deep and interwoven systemic sexism, racism that plays still an unfortunate role in the unions. How would you suggest we tackle equity from a union perspective, given your long-standing work to advance equity in the building trades?
Well, I would say that there's no one way in particular, but there's a lot of components that we have to look at. For myself, I have to say, first of all, I'm a sheet metal worker by trade. I'm with Local 28 in New York City, and I also serve on my union's executive board, but for my international, I'm on their Recruitment and Retention Council. So depending on which hat I'm wearing at the time, it's going to have an impact on what I can do to improve equity, inclusion, and diversity in the workplace. But I bring that up just to, emphasize the fact that it doesn't really matter where you're at or your starting point, that we're all in a position to improve equity, inclusion, and diversity in the workplace. My viewpoint is shaped by 34 years as a tradesperson, and if I'm going to say where we have to start, I'm going to say it's honesty. There's education, and there's actionable steps. When you talk about honesty, I think the first thing is to acknowledge that these inequities exist. And sometimes that's not so easy to do, because acknowledging that the equities exist also means that you have to acknowledge that privilege exists. And really, when it comes to those of us who are in positions of privilege and positions of power, that we have to be willing to use that privilege and our power to make the necessary changes, to exert an energy and exert a force, not only to improve the demographics in our workplace, but more importantly, to improve the messaging and the workplace culture that might promote inequity. We have to educate people, hold them accountable for all forms of discrimination in the workplace. And one of those types of education is really educating ourselves and realizing that bias exists. For years and centuries, right? This bias, discrimination, this has been here. And to really be able to accept that. And it can manifest in a lot of different ways. When you picture someone who works in the building trades, who do you picture? What's the face that you see? Is it a white cisgender male? If so, you haven't done anything wrong, right? We've been conditioned. That's how we've been conditioned to believe. We all have implicit bias that affect our attitudes and our stereotypes. And so we have to make a conscious effort to really overcome some of these biases. Messaging is also very important. I was thinking about one year during our recruitment, something very simple. We put on the applications, women are encouraged to apply. That's a very clear message to saying, hey, you're welcome. On our websites, what do we see when we're promoting these trades? Are we promoting it with just white men? Are we promoting it with women and people of color? All types of things that we can do. I look at my international union under the leadership of General President Sellers, um, and how proud I am of the example that we're setting. If you look on our website at smart-union.org, and you look at the diversity and inclusion statement, and I'm going to just read this, take a minute to read it verbatim. It says SMACNA, and that's our Contractors Association, and SMART, which is the Sheet Metal, Air, Rail, and Transportation Workers, recognize that diversity strengthens our workforce, benefits our communities, and makes the unionized sheet metal industry stronger and more competitive by reflecting the communities where we operate and the people we serve. To affirm our commitment to diversity and inclusion, we have agreed to develop, with the help of experts, a coordinated strategic plan with long-term and short-term objectives that will be evaluated and adjusted as necessary. Our unified goal is to shift the mindset of management, labor leaders, and our respective membership to recruit, welcome, and retain the most competent and skilled workforce available while embracing differences in age, ability, ethnicity, sex, gender, identity, national origin, language, marital status, political affiliation, race, religion, sexual orientation, and other characteristics that make individuals unique. SMACNA and SMART are strongly committed to take the necessary steps to achieve our goal of diverse industry with no tolerance for bullying, harassment, and discrimination. We will provide regular updates on our progress and on the strategic plan and on our continued work to promote shared values of diversity, inclusion, and equity. So those are really truly actionable steps. Setting up a council, setting up a group that's really going to look at this issue and then make the changes to change our culture. I serve with the Task Force on Trades Women's Issues, and their mission really is to unite with local and regional national experts, all in an effort to support women in the trades. And the task force helps to keep these issues on the forefront of people's minds. It's a voice of tradeswomen like myself who daily experience harassment, bias, and discrimination. Task Force gathers best practices to create policy, and it also empowers women to improve by providing them with support, education, and oftentimes specific trade leadership. I think if we look at the guidelines that are set forth us, we have the commissioner here with the Department of Labor, Office of Apprenticeship. We have the tools set in place, right? Are we following state and federal guidelines, EEOC guidelines? One of the things that the guidelines tells us is that anyone that's in contact with an apprentice has to undergo training with bullying, hazing, and harassment. That's a question. Is it being done? If it's not being done, are we holding people accountable? Because not to hold someone accountable is a message just as clear as when we do hold someone accountable. I noticed that in our last recruitment, we had a 20% in our pool were women, and people consider that to be a good number. And it's a little bit sad that that's considered a good number when we look at the population of women in our country. Some of these stereotypes that we have to overcome. Women don't want to get their hands dirty. That's why they don't come into the trade. No, that's not the the reason. They get their hands dirty every day. They may not be paid well to get their hands dirty, but all of us want a fair wage. And I think that's one of the things that unions just have to, stick to our ideals of making the best workplace possible, really for all workers. And oftentimes that might mean making hard decisions. It might be bringing individual members up on charges. It may be pointing out bad playing employers or contractors, and those things aren't easy to do. But it is something that as an industry that I feel is necessary. So that combination of really taking an honest look at ourselves and seeing where we are. There's a saying that the numbers don't lie. Numbers don't lie. People might. And when you look at your numbers and you see those retention is not there, there's a reason why. And it's really important for us to really dig down deep, examine those reasons, and then make the necessary changes or the strategic plan necessary for our industry.
Thank you so much, Leah. Let's shift focus a little bit to the state and federal levels. Roberta, as Commissioner for New York State Department of Labor, what can states like New York do to advance equity and job creation, especially in light of the unprecedented levels of investment in infrastructure, which will finance key state projects in the months to come?
Well, thank you for that excellent question, and thank you to the previous speakers. This has been an amazing experience already. There is a lot that states can do in this area, and I want to say first, we look at it this way as having three pillars in this area. States have a megaphone where they can make broad statements to the public and be heard. We have laws and regulations that we can enforce. And then, of course, we have practice. Are we actually doing ourselves the things that we tell other people that they should do? So those are sort of the three pillars that I framed this into. I want to point out, first of all, New York State has its first female governor in Kathy Hochul. And she has, in 6 months, done a tremendous amount with these three pillars. She has a great megaphone and she uses it well. She is pushing for new laws in this area, which I'll talk about in a minute, and she practices what she preaches. If you look at the people that she has appointed across the state in agencies and other places, you will see women of various ages, of various ethnicities, LGBTQ. I mean, it is an amazing difference. Suddenly, we have women and people of color in positions that were very few before. So she's not only talking the talk, she's walking the walk, and it's a great model for all of us. The days of, in the old days of Albany, it was 3 men in a room, did all the deciding on the budget. Then Andrea Stewart Cousins became the first woman, and she was a Black woman in that room. And now we're going to have women in that room for the first time. And I'm very excited to see what comes out of it. So Governor Hochul came in with a very bold agenda on equity. And one of the things that she is establishing is a council on equity that will be cabinet members as well as community leaders. And they will be advising her throughout her administration on equity matters. And this is really important. It's not just inside baseball, it's everybody across the state will be having those conversations. Another thing that the state has done recently, this past year, we achieved our goal of 30% of all state contracts were awarded to MWBE companies. So that's minority and women-owned businesses. This is a great example of having a law, but also having a practice that enforces that. So this conversation is not just about how do we get more workers, how do we get more people of color and women into the industry writ large. The federal and state infrastructure packages, President Biden's infrastructure bill is so exciting, but New York State also has a very robust number of infrastructure projects that we're pressing forward on. So we are already aware, as other speakers have said, there is a great need for trained, skilled tradespeople, and we're going to need more and more in the future. This opens up opportunity to have more jobs, means the ability to have more diversity. And we are going to have increased demand, and we're going to use a lot of our programs to make sure that we have a pipeline of women and people of color coming into these jobs. And I'll touch on that in a minute. But I also want to talk about reframing what we mean when we say infrastructure. Yes, roads, bridges, water systems, very critical. But as critical, social infrastructure, other people have talked about it, particularly women in business, in work, their work life, they need to have the social infrastructure as well. The pandemic pulled back the curtain on what happens when women don't have access to affordable and accessible childcare and elder care. So we need to make sure that those supports are there as well, because lots of communities can't come into these workforce spaces unless they have access to childcare and elder care. So we need those kinds of things addressed. Digital infrastructure, we're on a Zoom. We've all been on a Zoom or something like a Zoom for 2 years. Your kids have done a lot of their classes at the kitchen table. So we know that the digital world is very much a part of our world. It's as essential as heat and electricity and water. The digital infrastructure is critical, and we need to make sure that we are training people to be in that space as well. And then another part of infrastructure for New York State is clean energy, the green sector. I am on the Climate Action Council, and I'm co-chair of the Just Transition Working Group. And our focus is transitioning workers from older fossil fuel industry jobs into the new green sector. And we have a commitment that's in the climate action law that 45% of those opportunities will be available to underserved communities and women. We're going to make sure that they also participate in this new economy. We know that there are a lot of construction jobs in the green economy, but there are lots of other jobs there as well. So let's talk a little bit about the law part of it, the regulation. I was the co-chair of the Gender Wage Gap Report a couple of years ago with then Lieutenant Governor Kathy Hochul. It was an amazing experience. We heard from a lot of empowered women across the state. There were several things that were easy to do, relatively easy to do. We raised the minimum wage to $15. That means that the floor for everybody is automatically higher, and that pushes other wages higher as well. We have a salary history ban in New York State. So you can't ask, what did you make at your last job? And then you get pegged at, 10% increase of that. So the salary history ban is very important. But also the laws that everybody on this Zoom has talked about, paid sick leave and paid family leave. These are absolutely critical to make sure that women can participate in our economy. So we have a paid sick leave policy and a paid family leave policy in the state of New York, and it's making a difference already. So now let's pivot to what everybody's talking about, which is getting women into the construction business workforce. Apprenticeships increase opportunity. Great tradesmen and women are not born, they are trained. We are very proud in New York State. We have over 940 registered apprenticeship programs across the state. The largest ones, the ones with the highest enrollment, of course, are in the building and construction trades. They set the gold standard for this training a long time ago, and they're incredibly valuable. But we also have very important, like Oregon, we have pre-apprenticeship programs. We have direct entry programs, and we have other ways to get people. MAP upstate is another way to get minority candidates into the construction trades. We have things like pathways to apprenticeships, new non-traditional employment for women, and construction skills. These are very large training programs downstate, and they have had a significant impact on the diversity in the building trades. I am very happy to say that today, 42% of the apprentices in New York State are diverse. And that is a great change from 15 years ago. And that is only done because this was a forward-thinking, intentional program to enlist women and people of color in these various apprenticeship opportunities. As was said earlier, the pre-apprenticeship programs are so valuable because it gives women an opportunity to try out different skills, different trades, and then choose the trade that they want to go into. And we all know that unions are the great equalizer. Everybody gets paid the same wage. They get benefits. It just lifts everybody up. And as you know, probably know, New York State is a highly unionized state. The building and construction trade unions are very strong here, and they're very proud of all of their training programs. So now I'm going to roll a video for you of a woman in an apprenticeship program in the Hudson Valley. Wendy is a great example of the opportunity that these programs can provide. Roll the video, please.
My name is Wendy. I'm an apprentice, and this is why. When I purchased my home not that long ago, and in the pandemic, you're home, I'm fixing things, and I just really learned to love it. When I saw that the New York State apprenticeship program existed, I was just really excited that there were opportunities for women to get into such a male-dominated industry. Never felt like it was an option, that it's something that I would do and make money from and take care of my family and my kids. Just with the whole pandemic, myself, like a lot of people, really reassessed what we were doing in life and where we wanted to be. And I said, I'm gonna just have to go for it, because I'm not gonna live my life in regret doing something that people think I should do versus what I really want to do. I definitely see myself long-term here. I love this. I don't want to do anything else in life. I went into carpentry, pursuing a passion, and came out with a career.
So unfortunately, I could not see the video on my feed. I hope everybody else could. But Wendy's a great example of how these apprenticeship programs work. She's very proud of being able to work in this career and provide for her family. We have a lot of more stories like this. If you want to see more, it's on.ny.gov/thisiswhy. This is an example of the megaphone the state has. We create these videos using a very diverse group of workers, and these are really aimed at young people and people who are transitioning in their life to find a new career, to say, here's a career you might think about, and you might not have seen yourself doing it. And they're a great opportunity to use our megaphone and our practice at the same time. So, of course, there's still more work to be done. We all have diversity regulations in our apprenticeship programs. I'm glad Leah talked about that. We do enforce all the training that they are required to do. But let me talk a little bit about being a woman in an all-male room. I often have been in that situation. I know Leah has, and I'm sure our friends from Oregon have as well. It is not easy. And we have to ensure that women can see themselves in these rooms. You know, if I don't see someone like me in the room, I may walk away and never try it. I think that we have to lift up the people like Leah, who's an amazing person. She's a female Black training director in the trades, probably one of the few in the country. We have to lift her up and make her publicly available to people so other women can look and say, I can do that too. Leah's doing it. I think I can do this too. It's a very powerful tool that we have. I want to celebrate the Oregon program, which sounds amazing, and be able to do more in New York State to match some of the goals that you've outlined so clearly in Oregon. It's important to, everybody has to be accountable. Everybody needs to be at the table. But most importantly, we need to show that the industry is diverse and that this is an opportunity for everybody. There's such power in collective action, but we know that change starts on a smaller scale. Gandhi said, be the change you want to see. And that is so critical. We have to affect change by seeking opportunities to advocate for equity every day. People are reevaluating their futures, their work, sometimes even their identity. And the answers are often as unique as the individual, but we can help guide them to a future that lifts our state, our economy, and most importantly, our workers equitably. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Roberta. Caitlin, you serve as policy advisor to the Office of the Secretary at the U.S. Department of Labor. How can the U.S. DOL not only address equity and job creation, but take actionable steps to ensure this happens in practice across the United States?
Anne-Marie, thank you so much for that thoughtful question. First and foremost, I'm gonna keep it really real with y'all. It's a really big deal for any agency under any administration to be focused on equitable access to good jobs, particularly in the context of infrastructure and public works. As so many others have noted today, historically, women, people of color, individuals with disabilities, and folks living in rural communities have been on the periphery of government infrastructure investment and related job creation, or purposely circumscribed from full access. During the New Deal, as Andrea noted, the federal government continued to bake in discrimination into our national policy and our labor markets. Just to give a quick example, the Work Progress Administration, which spanned the 30s and 40s, is often held up as a successful infrastructure and jobs initiative. It was imbued with gender, race, and disability discrimination. Just one quick stat, at the time, women made up 25% of the civilian labor workforce, but were employed only in 12 to 18% of WPA jobs. So that's our success, which is not good. And again, we see a similar unfortunate pattern being repeated in the 50s and 60s on federal highway projects and in other federal funded construction projects. In fact, the lack of inclusion of Black workers on federally funded construction projects in the 50s and 60s led to protests in major northern cities across the country that ultimately motivated Presidents Kennedy and Johnson to sign EO's executive orders designed to create opportunity for underrepresented workers on federal construction projects. So I think we can all acknowledge and should acknowledge that the role of government is to support the success of all working people. And to the extent that we limited opportunities for specific communities, we have a duty to redress that. And that's why it's truly notable that this administration across all agencies is focused on rectifying past harms and ensuring that government works for all people across our nation. Because we know, as both Andrea and Rahi suggested, the federal government has massive power to establish practices that impact our society and labor markets for generations to come. President Biden issued an executive order on advancing racial equity and support for underserved communities throughout the federal government. And there, he committed to systemically redress inequities in federal policies, to advance equity across the federal government, and to create opportunities for the improvement of communities that have been historically underserved to the benefit of us all. I mean, this is like really, really huge stuff. So diving into the second half of your question, Anne-Marie, DOL's Good Jobs Initiative, working in partnership with the White House and federal agency partners, is a part of a whole of government national approach designed to ensure equitable access to good infrastructure jobs. And we're taking our cues from the top by lending our expertise, like the expertise we have at the Women's Bureau. Big shout out to Wendy and Gail, to our federal agency partners. DOL's Good Jobs Initiative is supporting improved job quality and creating access to good union jobs free from discrimination and harassment for all working people. Practically, what does that mean? This means we're working with agencies on their grants and other infrastructure law investments to promote policies known to support the entry of underrepresented workers like women, people of color, individuals with disabilities, and folks living in rural communities into good quality jobs. Specifically, we're working to incentivize pre-apprenticeship and registered apprenticeship programs. The commissioner and others noted, like, these are essential. Local hire policies, project labor agreements, and community workforce agreements. So many others today have noted the benefit of coverage under collective bargaining agreement, especially for women and POCs. Participation in our Office of Federal Compliance Contracting programs, OFCCP, they help to ensure communities have knowledge about the opportunities, the job opportunities, and create structures for contractors that help to make sure there's equitable access to the jobs. And they also have aspirational goals to make sure that we're meeting the moment and that the demographic representation on the jobs is appropriate. I also want to note we're working with our agency partners on the provision of supportive services to support the transportation needs, the childcare needs that often act as barriers for underrepresented groups. I believe Rahi talked about this, as well as our colleague from Oregon Women in Trades. Equity plans and other key tools that help to address underrepresentation in key infrastructure sectors like construction. Just on echoing quickly a few statistics that Leah and others mentioned, half of all workers nationally are women, and only 4 to 5% of women work in construction. Black workers make up 12% of our national workforce, and only 6% are in the construction industry. Latinx workers are overrepresented in low-wage construction work, and workers with disabilities make up 18% of the workforce and only 7% of the construction industry. However, we know it's essential that we tap into the talent of all workers to make our infrastructure investment a success. And for our national competitiveness, we really have never been able to afford to not tap into the diverse talent that we have. And in doing so, we can create entry into good family-sustaining union careers for underrepresented groups who are more likely to be concentrated in low-wage work, which is really unfortunate, and many others have talked about the historical legacy there. Moreover, I just want to leave us on this note. It's not some zero-sum game where folks in the industry will be pushed aside. Our emphasis on equity and inclusion is a win for everybody. We know that workers in infrastructure industries are retiring. The bipartisan infrastructure law investments will create large demand. And there's a current need for more skilled workers, as Rahi stated earlier. So Anne-Marie, I just want to thank you for the opportunity to chime in here. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Caitlin. That was wonderful. Let's bring everyone back together for a few questions to close out our session today. Thank you, everyone. So we've had several very good questions in the chat, but there's one that I think is particularly poignant that I'll start off with. And it's from a listener who writes, the encouragement of women, and specifically women of color, is a great first step towards equity. Building off that, what are concrete structural ways that retention and good quality of work-life balance are integrated into the workforce while being mindful of the additional pressures we face as representatives of our communities?
So Kelly, did you want to take that or?
Sure, I will jump in. Thank you so much for that great question, and there's so much great comments and chat in the chat box. So absolutely, one of the concrete steps that we can take is making sure that community organizations that provide pre-apprenticeship or workforce development training are working hand in hand with industry, and that includes our public owners, and making sure that there's a collaborative and coordinated effort to ensure that women not only get in, have the training and support they need, but once they're placed in a registered apprenticeship and out to work, that they have the continued support of mentors and a network of support that includes all of the industry partners. And last and not least, in addition to that collaboration and coordination and sound policy, is that we ensure that job sites are respectful, so that women and people of color are not leaving our industry because we're allowing bad behavior, illegal behavior, and unacceptable, harmful behavior to be a way of doing business.
And then I would just add that I think as a government, as a public owner of a project, that it really is also about being really clear about what's happening on the work sites and tracking and measuring. And having that kind of dialogue and partnership with our unions, with our contractors in real time. And I think, so much of the what happens in the work sites is under many layers of staff and leadership, but having like tracking and regular engagement to see what's happening with workers, where they are on the spectrum of wages, being able to ensure if there is a high level of kind of dropout of workers, what is happening on that work site, and to be able to share our experiences in one project with another agency of how did that contractor do on this project? Did they address the things that you wanted to address? And having a regional table where we are putting those experiences of workers at the center is so critical, and sharing information, because we want our contractors to know we're all paying attention to how they do on the work that they're doing for us and supporting the workers on their work sites.
Roberta, did you have something you wanted to add?
Well, you're absolutely right. We have to be able to measure and have data and support it, and because otherwise it becomes anecdotal and nobody believes us. So measuring is really incredible. I do know that when I was doing the gender wage gap report, one of the things we heard from women at every table we sat at was how critical accessible childcare is.
Yes.
And I have heard that a lot from women in construction. And I think that it's something we really have to be mindful about. Construction is a difficult job for a woman with a family. You start early and you come home earlier, but your day starts earlier than before. Your children go to school after you're out of the house. And, that is, we need to think about what are the supportive services we can have and offer women to keep them in the workforce, because that is one of the biggest reasons women do a lateral move. They may stay in the industry, but they won't stay in that actual job because they can't take care of their families.
I think it's also important to really highlight best practices. In our industry, we're very competitive. Sheet metal workers, we want to be better than the iron workers. We want to be better than the electricians. We want to be better than the laborers. So when you're able to really highlight best practices, if you have an industry or union in particular that's doing well, if you have an employer in particular that's doing well, it does two things. One, it encourages us to continue to do well, and two, it disposes those myths that it can't be done. So I think those best practices and having them highlighted on a local, regional, even national level, it dispels a lot of myths of something that can't be done.
A lot. Andrea, what I love about your framing is this, you're very frank about that we have to rewrite the racial and gendered rules and regulations, but we also have to address the normative practices, which you make very clear. And this issue of normative practices has come up in every presentation today, particularly this notion of bad behavior. One question in the chat that I think might relate to this is, how, and I think this is particularly addressed at Leah, but everyone else, please chime in. Are the seniority rules for job assignments a problem for building equity in the building trades? Is that kind of one of the underlying challenges to reversing some of the rules and or bad behavior?
I don't really see it so much as the seniority rule, because oftentimes we're looking at rates, right? Rates of pay. That's more so the rule that we look at more so than seniority. But I think what does have to be addressed is if you don't fit in, if you don't fit our vision of a construction worker, which is why I asked that question. When you see a picture, what do you see? In your mind's eye, what do you vision as that construction worker? And so we can put women and especially women of color in a very precarious situation because you're kind of the opposite end of what's imagined.
Right.
And some of the things I've noticed is that focused of attention on women and women of color in the industry. You may go to the bathroom twice and the impression is, oh, this girl, she's always going to the bathroom. You may be out twice. Well, she's always late. So it's really those perceptions that I see as a bigger problem than actual seniority and mentorship, as several of the speakers have brought up, is really very important, right? Because having someone to be able to speak up in your behalf, having someone to help you, to navigate, to understand, is this behavior illegal? Is this just just in joking around? Or is this hazing? Is this, harassment? And kind of know what's that level, because in the industry, we certainly can be pranksters. And I'll say that our version of humor might be a little bit different from some of the other industries, but having a mentor that'll kind of help you navigate through those difficult situations, I see as something more pertinent than actual seniority in the industry.
And I would just, I so appreciate, Leah, for you to say that, because I do think that we often start out with our union partners in this, really contentious space. And my background is a union organizer for many years. And I understand, unions develop different strategies and rules as a way to support their members and to protect them. And so I think it's so important that we take a step back for a minute and say, well, why do certain policies and rules exist in project labor agreements or in collective bargaining agreements that the unions have? And what does it serve? And how can we have a conversation about pivoting those rules to get to the bigger gain here, which is you're losing membership, you're losing market share. How do we continue to grow the workforce so we can do more work and take on more projects? And I do think that that's kind of the space we came from, was like, why do these policies exist, and what could we do to help them think other strategies, because they can also have a negative impact in terms of their membership. And what they can do in the region, what kind of projects they can take on. So I feel like dialogue, relationship, trust building is so critical, and starting from a place that every system is developed for the rationale of what it's supposed to produce. And, we need to understand that, and then think about what are the different things we're trying to produce now, and how do we change the systems to produce those different outcomes.
If I could just jump in and tag on to that, Andrew, if you don't mind, I would say one of the things that it's revolutionary, but it shouldn't be revolutionary in the work that we're doing here in Portland with the regional framework, is that we also have, alongside of that C2P2 collaborative commitment, we have a coalition called the Safe from Hate Alliance. And it came out of a horrific incident where one of our graduates, a woman of color, found a noose on a job site and called Oregon tradeswomen to say, what do I do? What do I do now? And we were able to bring folks together collaboratively, in large part because Rahi and the team at Metro had already brought us to the table. So working through those hard conversations to shift and say, the way we've done business is no longer okay. So that has helped us move that conversation forward.
Oh, this has been such an incredibly wonderful conversation. I wish so much that we had more time. But I'm afraid that we have come to the close of our session. And before we close out, though, I'd like to thank you from the bottom of my heart for your time today and for your thoughtful comments and reflections and your work in the field. It's It's so pivotal, and it's rarely that we get the chance to thank one another for everything you do to help each other, to help me, to help us. On that note, I'd like to shift and close our session with Wendy Chun, who is the director of the Women's Bureau, to give us some closing and final thoughts. Thank you, Wendy.
Thank you so much. This has been incredible. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Wendy Chun. I have the honor of directing the Women's Bureau. And I have to let you know, we're the only federal agency that's dedicated to addressing the needs of working women. And so for the past 102 years, we have elevated challenges women face, and we have fought for solutions. So again, I am really honored to be with you all today, and for the Women's Bureau to partner with Cornell's Worker Institute. Thank you to all of our colleagues at Cornell and to each of you, our speakers, for your time and your insight and your leadership, and to you all who have been participating in this amazing discussion. There is a lot to unpack and digest and learn from. And as our Deputy Secretary, Julie Su, shared at the outset, the Biden-Harris administration is leading an historic economic recovery, but in order to build back an economy that is fair and inclusive and resilient, we have to seize this opportunity to address some really deep and longstanding inequities that continue to hold back women and people of color and working families. And I think Andrea said this at the beginning, COVID simply exacerbated the challenges that women already faced in the labor force, from everything you heard today: employment discrimination, sexual harassment, pay inequity, limited advancement opportunities, among many others. This pandemic has also set back women's work by more than 3 decades. We know that the jobs that historically held by women are some of the lowest quality jobs in the economy. We know that the construction careers that we talked about today, mostly held by men, are far better paid than work in childcare or elder care. And clearly, we need both construction and care workers to keep our society functioning. When women are underpaid, they and their families are negatively impacted. And while we need to ensure that women are paid fairly, no matter what career path they choose, we also need to ensure that workers have access to careers that are based on our interests and not on our gender. And that's why the conversation today is so timely and powerful. The bipartisan infrastructure law is an historic jobs investment. We as a nation can and must use this funding to transform our labor market by recruiting, training, and retaining women to enter into these career paths. And the good news is, clearly, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We have heard today, all of your programs are already working to create equitable pathways into construction. Today, we heard about structural barriers that women and people of color have to navigate. We also heard about strategies and policies that work to create equity in the labor market. We can learn from these examples. Everyone here today has a role to play in designing and implementing policies and programs that will dismantle structural barriers and achieve equity. Let's use this historic moment to rebuild our country, keeping equity in focus. Today's webinar is really the first in our series. I saw several people ask in the chat, what about gender equity in jobs that are traditionally dominated by men? But what about the strategies to ensure that jobs that women have been concentrated in are also occupations that allow them to live with dignity and allow them to meet their basic needs? That's coming up soon. We thank you so much for joining us. We look forward to meeting up again in April.